Okay, hi everybody. We are live. We're just going to wait for all the participants to be let into the meeting. Okay, wow, there are 200 participants already in the Zoom. It's amazing. Okay, I think we're ready to begin. So welcome everyone to the first of the Chabad Resiliency series. Thank you all for joining. Thank you to Mr. Max Eisen for joining and to Professor Stephen Burke. I'm going to speak for very, very short, and then I'm going to pass it over to Professor Burke. So we take a look at the Jewish calendar right now. We're currently in a 7-week period between the 2 Jewish holidays of Passover and Shavuot, when the Jewish people received the Torah at Mount Sinai. And during this time, we spend some time every single day working to refine our characters and head onto the path of self-actualization. And one of the customs is every Shabbat during this time is to study a chapter from Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot. Ethics of Our Fathers is a part of the written Torah that is completely devoted to Jewish morals, values, and ethics. Memory plays a central role in Judaism. A very important Jewish value is zachor, to remember our past. And more than just remembering, it's to be inspired, to gain fortitude and perspective that will help us to define our goals, our future, and our way of life. There is such a thing as evil in this world. There's such a thing as tyranny. And we must always remember our obligation, together with our capacity to eradicate it. Jewish values never intended that these memories should be passive. Shmueli and I, our spiritual mentor and the inspiration behind Chabad at Union, who's the Rebbe, would urge us to utilize the power of remembering these atrocities in turning the darkness of this world into light through increasing in mitzvahs, in good deeds. And it's always important that these memories should be a call to action for us to do something. And it is now my honor and privilege to introduce Professor Stephen Burke, who in the Union community needs no introduction. Professor Burke, you have the mic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lakey. On March 19th, in 1944, the German army invaded and occupied Hungary. That was done at the express orders of Adolf Hitler. What is interesting here is that Hungary had been a German ally, and Hungary had participated in Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union. Yet after the German defeat at Stalingrad, the government of Hungary, putting its fingers up, collective fingers up to the wind, saw that Germany was not going to end the war, was not going to win the war. And so secretly, at least they thought secretly, the Hungarian government sent emissaries to talk to the British and the Americans, somehow negotiating a withdrawal of Hungary from the Axis, from the German side. Unfortunately for Hungary and for the Hungarian government, the Nazis became very much aware of it. Nazi intelligence picked it up. And that's why Hitler ordered the invasion of Hungary. Hungary was too close to Germany. If Hungary defected, this would really be a very serious problem for the German war effort. So on March 19th, the German army marches into Hungary. Hungary, which had been an allied country, now becomes an occupied country. And as the night follows the day, when the Germans invaded and occupied a country, soon after will come the angel of death. That's Adolf Eichmann, head of Section 4B4 of the Reich Security Main Agency. Adolf Eichmann was the architect of the Holocaust. He arranged all the deportations. And so the apocalypse comes to Hungary. A deal is struck. The Hungarian government is under great pressure. And the government of Hungary agreed, we'll give you the Jews who live outside of Budapest. For now, the Jews of Budapest will remain. They will not be deported. And young Max Eisner, with his father and his mother, 2 brothers and a baby sister, they were now on Hungarian territory, and they were deported to Auschwitz. Max's book is a wonderful book. I mean, I've read many Holocaust memoirs. I think this is certainly one of the best. Max saw things that no other person, other people should never see. The rest of his family went, to use that colloquial expression of the Holocaust, they went up the chimney. Max suffered terribly. Other people suffered terribly as well. And when the war was over, Max was sick. Max suffered a certain amount of persecution at the hands of the communists. Stalin had sent the Red Army into Eastern Europe and persecuted all those people that, at least from Stalin's point of view, people that were not suitable to exist in his new communist paradise. The result is that Max barely survived, but tenacity and courage and luck, these will allow him to survive. And more than survive, he will thrive. He'll survive the war, survive the immediate post-war period, go to Canada, marry, raise a family, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, be as prosperous, a successful businessman. And to my students who are listening, there's a lesson here, my friends. I'm not the old man of the mountain. I'm not a philosopher, and I'm certainly not a rabbi. But I'll tell you this, nobody gets through this world without taking a hit. Everybody takes a hit. We all find times when we are despondent. In those difficult times, my friends, I urge you to think of Max Eisen. Think of him. Think what he went through. Think of what he survived, and think of how he put his life together afterwards. He is a model for us all. And that's why it is my privilege and my honor to introduce Max Eisen to you.
So can I start now?
Yes, you can, Max.
Thank you, Professor. So many memories these last few weeks. Pesach is always a reminder why we celebrate the Seder. For many Hungarian Jews, that was the last Seder 77 years ago. And we remember the Shoah, which means a catastrophe, Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaTzmaut. And, you know, I've been speaking in Canada here in Toronto for 32 years. I spoke to hundreds of thousands of students, police, politicians, and I landed in Canada in 1949. I heard that there was anti-Semitism here, that pre-World War II, there were areas where Jews and dogs were not allowed to come, Jews were not allowed to buy property. I didn't feel any anti-Semitism. Eventually I was in business and I was dealing with people. But the last few years, this poison of anti-Semitism or hatred of Jews has reappeared. And my PowerPoint says it starts with words and it ends in horrible places. This is how it started in continental Europe with poison, propaganda. The Nazis, they had a ideology, which was a powerful ideology. Anyone with racial features, religious beliefs, who did not fit in the mold of the master race was to be simply eliminated from the face of the world. Germany was the most cultured country in Europe. And Europeans always, they sort of basked in this belief that this is the old cultured world of Europe. Nazi Germany had a ministry of propaganda. The head of it was Dr. Goebbels. And they had a powerful machinery of deception. So the lies became the truth. And you know, I look at the world today or what happened during World War II, and I think a lot of people need to learn from the past. And you can see how things unfolded in these last 5 years or so, even more than before. And so here was Dr. Goebbels, the minister of propaganda. He claimed that he had this sophisticated machine, which was a microphone. And he spewed this hatred 24/7. Can you imagine what you can do with a cell phone today? How you can spread poison and hatred in a matter of split seconds. So Jews were depicted in the German propaganda. Here, Jews are money grabbers, they're communists. In documentaries, Zeus was another one who was demonized. They made a documentary of him. So, and you know, the 6 million Jews paid with their lives, including 1.5 million children. The Nazis knew that if you kill the children, you kill an entire nation. These children whose wings were not allowed to spread, whose talents have been lost to the world. And I can speak of a few remarkable kids who didn't survive. And there must have been thousands and tens of thousands of these smart kids. Anne Frank, she wrote a diary. There was a boy in Prague, the diary of Peter Ginz, a remarkable boy. Anne Frank, had she survived, she would have been 92 years old today, same as I. How many books she could have written by now? So the Nazis came out with a racial laws against the Jews by 1935. And you see the brown shirts of Hitler standing in front of Jewish stores and painting slogans on Jewish storefronts. And this, they couldn't paint it because there's a steel fence on it. They painted it on the Jewish storefronts with white or red paint or black paint. Kauf nicht von Juden, do not buy from Jews. So this was the beginning of boycotts. And the boycott were numerous. Jewish teachers and professors were fired from their jobs. Jewish kids could not attend public school, university. Jews could only sit in a park bench that was marked for Jews. They could only shop at 7 o'clock in the evening. They couldn't go to movies, to theater. They couldn't have a pet. Germany had a population of over 60 million people. Amongst them lived 500,000 Jews. Many German Jews actually were more German than the Germans themselves. It didn't help them any. So it started with a boycott and then divestment. Jews were eliminated step by step systematically from all their worldly possessions. Their bank accounts were blocked. Their businesses were confiscated without any compensation. Their artwork was taken away from them, worth many, many millions and millions of dollars. And eventually, sanctions. They were put on trains. These were in the early days before the war broke out in 1939. They were sent to Buchenwald and Dachau and Sachsenhausen. So I'm dealing with this BDS movement, and we're all dealing with it in North America. And you need to understand what this BDS movement means. Because if we don't understand what it means, We are being fooled. Remember the Nazi deception movement. The Nazis didn't tell the Jews after the war broke out that we are going to take you to the East and kill you by gas or by bullets. They said we're going to resettle you in the East. So BDS, boycott means excommunication. Divestment means expulsion. Sanctions means extermination. This is what BDS movement means, and it's well and alive in North America, in universities. People signed on to this. And I have to tell you that this is a very serious problem. People tend to glance over it. So 1938, Czechoslovakia, where I was born, was a democratic country. It came on the scene in 1919. So did Poland and Yugoslavia. These three Slavic countries came on the scene in 1919 at the Versailles Treaty. Britain and France and Italy, they were the guarantors that they'll come to our aid if we are going to be attacked by the Nazis. Jews in Czechoslovakia had 20 golden years. Our president was President Masaryk. He was an amazing man. He was like our grandfather and father. When he died in 1936, the Jewish community went into mourning. Czechoslovakia had several ethnic groups. There were the German-speaking people near the German border. They were the Czech people in Bohemia, Moravia. The center of the country were the Slovaks, and the eastern part of the country were the Magyars. And I come from the eastern part of Slovakia. I'm an ethnic Hungarian. This was the language we spoke in our home. I learned Slovak when I started school when I was 6 years old. And the town where I lived, it is called now Moldova again. Czechoslovakia had a very difficult time. Their borders were moving back and forth quite often. So the town where I lived, there were probably about 5,000 people. The Jewish community numbered about 90 families in my town. Jews practically made the town work. 90 Jewish families were traditional Orthodox Jews. My grandfather had a beard like Emperor Franz Joseph. You see, all the grandfathers in my town, they were fighting in the First World War. My grandfather and his buddies from my town, they were all in the cavalry of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They were all decorated non-commissioned officers. And my father had a drinking place. It was called a pinsa, a cellar. My grandfather had a lumber yard. We were, I would say, middle-class families, and we lived in a large house. Many Jewish families in Europe lived that way, the extended family. And, you know, it was a wonderful way for a child to grow up in an extended family environment. 3 families, 3 kitchens. Can you imagine? I could wind up at my grandmother's kitchen or my aunt's kitchen. When my mother made sure that we had a balanced diet. She was really my guardian angel. But when she made tomato soup with rice, for some reason, I just didn't like tomato soup and rice. So I wound up at my grandmother's place. And you know, the time came years later when I would give anything to have a bowl of tomato soup and rice. So I have experienced no anti-Semitism in Czechoslovakia. In 1938, Hitler demanded part of my country. And there was a conference called the Munich Conference. The Prime Minister of Britain, Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of France, Daladier, and the Italian representative, because in the First World War, Italy was in the Allied alliance. They were asked to come to this crucial meeting to Munich. So I want you to think very carefully about this meeting that I'm going to tell you about. The Czechoslovakian president, who was Dr. Beneš, he was not even asked to come to this crucial meeting. We Czechoslovakian Jews, we knew that we were in mortal danger. There's nothing we could do in 1938. It was too late. What happened is that they offered up my country, the Sudeten part of Czechoslovakia, where the German-speaking people were. It was a large part of the country, the industrialized part of the country. Hitler demanded that part, and he threatened war unless he's given the Sudeten part of Czechoslovakia. So guess what happened? Hitler was not a stupid man. He wanted to size up these two prime ministers. He wanted to already had plans to rule the entire Europe and the world eventually. But he wanted to make sure who he is dealing with. Chamberlain and Daladier, they gave away my country for a document that wasn't worth the paper it was written on. And you know, when you appease a dictator, it follows the war. There is no two ways about it. You remember Chamberlain arrived in London, got off his plane, and waved this document, and he said, "Peace in our time." And Daladier came back to Paris. The headlines were "No war," champagne and music, dancing was, everybody had a wonderful time in Paris. And Chamberlain wrote in his diary, imagine, we wouldn't go to war for a country so far away whose name we cannot even pronounce. Imagine. A country whose name they cannot even pronounce. And you know, Hitler wrote in his diary about Chamberlain, and excuse me for this word, he said that he called him an a-hole. This is public domain in documents. So a few months later, after this part of Czechoslovakia was detached, the Nazi troops crossed the demarcation line, they entered Prague, and the country ceased to exist. We were partitioned into three parts: Bohemia, Moravia, and that included Prague, became the so-called protectorate of the German Reich. And Hitler sent his deputy, Heydrich, who was a ruthless killer. He became the protector of Bohemia and Moravia. The center part of the country, Slovakia, was formed an autonomous country of Slovakia, a fascist country under Dr. Joseph Tiso. And this is where my maternal family were stuck, around Michalovce, and my grandmother and my two single uncles, they had a big farm. And you know, for the last 3 years, 1938 was the last time I was there at my grandmother's farm. I was there 2 years before. I used to meet my beautiful cousins, these gorgeous girls that were a few years older. Two of them, I remember their names, Edith and Lily. And I think of my grandmother, how she coped with 8, 10, 12 grandchildren on this farm. They were such hard workers, these people, you know, farmers. They go to bed at 12 o'clock and they're up before the sun rises. And my two single uncles, and we had a ball. And after this partition, and we were given to Hungary. So we were now greeting our Hungarian liberators, and we knew that this was a poison that's coming. But we had to greet them. And I remember my grandfather and his buddies, about 7 other grandfathers. My grandfather took me up into the attic. We had a huge attic. And I helped him to bring down a big trunk. And we opened this trunk, and there was my grandfather's cavalry shako with a big plume and his jacket and riding pants and boots. And I was in shock, under the checks, you didn't want to show that, that you were fighting for the Austro-Hungarians. But now the Hungarians were coming in, and all these grandfathers, they had to now see how are we going to deal with these Hungarians who are coming to occupy us. So it was a big thing because our Slovak police, the bureaucrats and the Slovak teachers left, and they were replaced by Hungarian teachers, bureaucrats, and Hungarian gendarmes. And these Hungarian gendarmes are a crude bunch. They have their long black riding boots and a old gun with a 2-foot bayonet, and they have a black felt hat with a red rooster tail feathers. And of course, these Hungarian teachers, they were terrible Jew haters. So now here we are, Jewish kids. We are being singled out by these teachers. The teachers separated us from the rest of the class. We are made to sit in the back of the classroom. And every day, these edicts were being posted in my town. The first edict that was posted, Jews cannot have a radio. My father had a crystal radio, which was a very cranky piece of equipment. It said that Jews have to bring their radios and bicycles down to town hall. And these edicts were numerous. Day after day, they were being posted. And a couple of days later, they posted an edict that Jews cannot sell alcohol and tobacco. See, somebody in town had an eye on my father's business. And he also had a distillery where they made schnapps, which is made, it's a very popular drink in that part of the world, Slivovitz. And he simply walked into my father's business and he said, Zoltan, give me your keys and you're out. And they were good friends before. How things changed when Hungarians came in. So to make a long story short, eventually an edict came out that all able-bodied Jewish men from 18 years to 45 had to report to labor battalions. So out of the 90 heads of families, I would say 90%, the 10% they had some ailments that they couldn't, they were not allowed to go to these battalions, labor battalions. So I had a pass, but the others were gone. My father, my uncle, and my grandfather was the head of the family. So in this large house, it was an L-shaped house. My parents, we lived in the front part. I had 2 younger brothers, and we called them Shmilu and Moishi. And my name was Tibor. I was called Tibi. And eventually I had a baby sister. She was born in 1943. So here there is now we had a beautiful synagogue for 90 Jewish families. We had a mikvah. We had a burial society, a beautiful synagogue. My mother had a helper whose name was Anna. She came to be my mother's helper when I was born in 1929. So you need to think, how does a Jewish family keep itself warm in the winter? You see, here we simply take it for granted that the heat comes from an electric, you preset your heat and the heat comes, so the air conditioning comes. You open a tap and water comes out. We had a beautiful house. But my mother had a stove in the kitchen, a beautiful stove. And we had a fireplace in every bedroom. So who is going to keep you warm in the winter? Well, Anna had to do this for 3 families. She kept us warm during the winter. And the law came out, the Jews cannot employ non-Jewish people. My mother didn't have a dishwasher, a wash machine. When heavy linen had to be washed, I don't know how my mother would have dealt without her help. And Anna had to leave. This was in early 1941. and she didn't want to leave. She was with us now for about 12 years or so. She was like part of the family. She knew all our customs, everything. She didn't want to leave. Two gendarmes around appeared and they removed her body, they removed her. My mother's love became very difficult. In my grandparents' quarters, they had a daughter. Her name was Bella, Aunt Bella. She was an invalid. I think she had polio. She was constantly reading books. And I remember as a child, I don't know, I may have been less than 2 years old, I was sitting on her lap. I was absolutely mesmerized by the beautiful pictures in these books that she was reading, and she was telling me stories. She taught me how to read. I was not quite 6 years old when I finished Jules Verne's books. She taught me the love of books. And my grandfather was truly my role model. My grandfather was a big, strong man. He was a man of the land. He knew animals. And he worked in this lumber yard, and I was a terrible student. I could not sit in a school environment. I had a Malamed in the, he was a very strict man. I remember the beatings I used to receive from him. I think there is a law. It's called Tsar Balachai, that you mustn't hurt an animal. And he was beating me. He was trying to beat it into my head, and he was taken away into the labor battalions as a kid, 11, 12. I was so happy that he was gone. So the rabbi took over, he was teaching us, took up the. So you can see how systematically a lot of Hungarian Jews was getting worse and worse. So my father was gone for 3 years, and my uncle, and so were the other heads of families. They were allowed him to come home once a year for a week to see how their families were doing. But grandfather was holding everything together. I helped him in his lumber yard. We had a huge orchard with hundreds of fruit trees. We never had to buy anything other than spices. We were able to, we had all kinds of food, fruit, vegetables were prepared for the winter. We had chickens, geese, and ducks. We had schmaltz, kosher, for Pesach and for every day, smoked meat from geese. And we had this huge property, and we had a big Alsatian. His name was Farkas. In Hungarian, it means a wolf, and 2 fox terriers. And I had many friends. We used to play hide and seek, cowboys and bandits. There was a lot of places to hide in my property. So I was 12 and a half years old. So when the law came out that Jewish kids had to wear a yellow star, well, as soon as the Hungarian army came in, I would say a few months later, Jewish kids arrived in the schoolyard in the morning. We were outnumbered. I think we were about 7% of the student body. There were fights every morning. And when you walked from school to, from home to school or back, was quite often, that some rocks were thrown at you. You had to dodge rocks. And this was on a daily basis. You had to fight your way into the school. And the teachers just kept telling them, keep on doing it to them. So I was, and some other Jewish kids were thrown out of school. I was 12 and a half years old. And my mother, in her wisdom, she took me to the capital city of my province. It was called Kasia. Today it's called Košice. It's the Slovak Republic. There were 16,000 Jews living in Kasia. It had a large Jewish community, several synagogues, and there was a tram, and I was working as an apprentice in a fur shop at 12 and a half. My grandfather taught me work skills and life skills. I was helping him in the lumber yard, and there was no monkey business. My grandfather expected me to be the best no matter what he told me to do. He expected me to be the best at it. And I look back, and it was sort of like they prepared a map for me to travel by, truly. My grandfather, my mother, what she did for me. She got me out of town as soon as the school was finished. The Talmud Torah wasn't quite finished yet, but you know, she knew that I need to get away from there, and she sent me off to her mother's farm. But grandfather gave me skills, and so did my mother. My father was a very strict disciplinarian. He was a businessman. And had I not had those skills, I don't think I would have been here. I would be here to tell you the story. So 1942, the Jews in Slovakia, they started to deport Jews in Slovakia. So after 1939, when we became Hungarians, and we couldn't go to Slovakia anymore, Jews could not cross borders. We could send a postcard once in a blue moon, but the cattle, the dairy cattle, they had about 50 cows and sheep. Their pastures fell into the Hungarian area, and they were allowed to send their cows and sheep. The herdsmen brought them over to the Hungarian side, and they always brought cheeses, specialty cheeses that were made on the farm. And somebody from the Hungarian side sent it off to us. So one day we received a telegram, this was in 42, that the Friedman family, my maternal family, they were taken away. This could happen to Jews. They simply disappeared from the face of Slovakia. The first Jews in Central Europe. We were devastated. My mother was devastated. And now the deception that the Nazis used, about 3 months later, we received a postcard. They had a German eagle on it, and the stamp said Lublin District, General Government. Let's see, Poland, after it was occupied, was called General Government. And the message on the other side was very simple. It said, we, the Friedman family, we're all here together. We are awaiting your arrival, and we are working on farms. You see, when the lies become the truth, several other families received similar cards. Imagine these Nazis 2 years ahead before the Hungarian Jews in 1944 were deported. They were already planning down the road for 2 years. And this is how brainwashing works. So we couldn't go, we knew where Lublin was. In 1942, we Hungarian Jews didn't know what was going on in occupied Poland. We never heard this word Auschwitz or Treblinka or Majdanek. And not knowing is a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. And you know, knowing that something is happening is even worse, a million times worse. So this was 1942. 1943, my Aunt Bella died. Her life simply gave out. We had a cousin who was a very famous gynecologist in Košice, about 50 kilometers from my town. He came 3 times a week to take care of my Aunt Bella. Her body was falling apart, literally. And her body was prepared in our home. They made a casket from my grandfather's lumber yard. And she was buried in the cemetery in Sepsi. For some reason, we were not allowed to go to the cemetery. My 2 little brothers and myself, I guess I had to stay back to take care of them. Everybody else was gone to the cemetery. And you know, out of 80 people of my family, both maternal and paternal, Aunt Bella was the only one that was buried. I can't find a marker for her because, you know, many markers are gone in the Jewish cemeteries in Europe. They were being used for all kinds of purposes. They're broken down and they're sunk into the ground. And so there was death in 43, and my mother gave birth to a little girl in August of 43. And, you know, that was a terrible year for a Jewish mother or a Jewish child to be born. The mothers truly bore the brunt of life. So 1944. So let me just stop here before 1944 Pesach. Poland was attacked in 1939. It was occupied. It was in 2 weeks. Jews were put into large ghettos. You all know that. Huge ghettos. Warsaw, Krakow, Lodz, and other small ghettos. There were 3.5 million Jews in Poland. And there were, I don't know, maybe 4 or 4.5 million in the Soviet Union. That included the Ukraine, Belarus, Ossetia, Transnistria. The bulk of the Jewish people lived in the East, in Poland and the Soviet Union. So life in the ghetto was terrible. 100 people per room or 80 people, I don't know. They were starved. And you saw pictures of children dying from starvation, bodies put out on the street for this unit to pick them up and put them in the mass graves. Terrible. In 1941, Hitler attacked the Soviet Union. 3 million units of the SS and Wehrmacht attacked the Soviet Union with machinery, panzer units, and aircraft, and other countries. And they were followed by special killing units called the Einsatzgruppen. You see these shooters here. Heinrich Himmler, who was the Reichsführer of the SS, he spoke to these killers. These are all volunteers. He says, you're going to do a job. You're going to be the biggest heroes of the Reich. But nowhere in the history of the German Reich will anything be written about your heroism. If you cannot do it, you can leave. One thing you need to not to do, you must not take pictures of what you're doing. Over 2 million Jews were murdered in pits and ravines. The order of the Reichsführer was 1 bullet per Jew, 1 Jew per bullet. You heard of Babi Yar near Kiev. You know, mother would hold the baby in her arm. She would get a shot in the back of her head. And the baby would still be alive, toppled into the pits. And you know, I say that that bullet to the head was better than what they did after. They said, this is taking, it costs too much. Bullets are expensive. It's too slow. So they found a powerful pesticide called Zyklon B gas. And they were experimenting with that. And eventually they built an industrial complex in Auschwitz to Birkenau. With 4 huge crematoria and gas chambers. And they were killing Jews by the millions in gas chambers. There was a French priest, Father Patrick Dubois, who went to the Ukraine and Belarus about 10, 15 years ago, and he spent 7 years trying to find mass graves of Jews. All he wanted to do is mark these mass graves as a Jewish cemetery. And he knew halakha, he learned, he spoke perfect Hebrew, he went to the University of Jerusalem. I remember he was in Toronto, he spoke at a synagogue. There were 2,000 people. You could hear a pin drop. So somebody asked him, Father Dubois, why did you do this? So he quoted Genesis, I think if I'm correct, chapter 4, verse 11. If you recall the story, Cain and Abel are out in the field working, and Cain rose up and killed his brother Abel. God said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? And yes, Cain answers, am I my brother's keeper? Patrick Dubois said, "I feel that I'm my brother's and my sister's keeper." And the problem was, he said, there's many more places, but they will not allow them to go back. You see, they will not be allowed to come back, to keep looking for more mass graves. So, and from there on, the gas chambers were working full tilt. 1944, the last year of the war, this was liberation in Auschwitz, January 27. You see these few people that were found by the Russians. It was too late. There's nothing that could be done for them. Do you realize what starvation does to your body? Your organs are finished. You're simply slipping away. These people were dying of starvation. And when they were liberated, either by the Russians or the Americans, when food was given to us, it killed us. Our bodies could not retain food. Protein was a killer. Here is a German officer who was stripped of all his rank and insignia of the SS. Here's a truckload of somebody's children. They look like they were just brought in because the women still have their hair. They are in civilian clothes. Can you imagine Jews packed on trucks, dumped somewhere? The Jewish life wasn't worth a plugged nickel, as they say, in continental Europe. A tattoo number, and it happens to be an A. It was Hungarian Jews were given a A and the number. So you see me in this beautiful outfit that my mother made. Not only was she a wonderful mother, she fed us a balanced diet. She was a seamstress. You couldn't go to any store in my town. There was no such store that you could buy these clothes off the rack. So my mother made all these clothes for us. There was a lady who lived across the street from us. This was in 1944. Well, let me tell you about the Seder first. It is a big to-do to get ready for Pesach. My grandfather and I, we had to bring down all the Pesach dishes for 3 families from the attic. It was a steep ladder attached to the building, but it was very difficult. And grandfather and I had this job and bring it down. We had a well, and it was cleaned and washed. Clothes were hanging on ropes outside. Every pocket was turned inside out. The house was cleaned from top to bottom. There wasn't a drop of chametz left anywhere. And 1944, we had plenty of food. You know, we had geese that we were feeding them with corn. And we still didn't know what was happening in Auschwitz. So I always went to a cousins of my grandmother's brother. They had this huge general store in town. It was a big store. The entire family was working in the store. You went into the store and you could smell the spices. And I was hooked on coffee beans. Those coffee beans, because during the year we had coffee every morning, but not coffee. It was chicory, some kind of a wheat roasted, and that was good. But for Pesach, we had coffee, and I had this bowl for Pesach, and it was going to be coffee with matzah, with lots of sugar. That was the first breakfast, and I was waiting for this all year round. We didn't eat matzah during the year. It was in Pesach was time for matzah, and that was it. So, and I remember the first Seder night was Friday night, so it was Shabbat, and the first night it was April the 7th, 1944. My mother was roasting these coffee beans, and it permeated the entire building. It was in the yard, and I was climbing a wall. Really, I was hooked on. That smell was amazing. So my father and uncle appeared in the morning. How they did it, I don't know. And so they were home, and we had a Seder, a normal, beautiful Seder. My baby sister was in a crib. My two younger brothers, they split the questions, the manishtana. I always had the job to get the horseradish from the garden. You know, they grow, they are perennials, and I had to dig it out. And I had to grade it, and there was a lot of crying doing this, you know. It's powerful. So we finished about 12 o'clock, and the dishes were put away, and my grandfather and my father and uncle were out in the yard. And Farkash was moving around. Our property was a large property. It was a fenced with barbed wire on top, a big gate, and nobody has ever encroached on our property that would take some lumber out, or because Farkash was a real deterrent. And my grandfather said that if we manage to hold out for another 4 to 5 months, we are going to be liberated by the Red Army. You see, by that time we knew that the war was coming to an end, because many of our Hungarian neighbors who were in the Hungarian army, we heard that they died on the Eastern Front. Many came back without limbs. And my grandfather was a military man from the First World War, and he said it's coming to an end. And you know, the ending is always a terrible thing, you know, it never ends well especially for the Jews. So we were that close. So we had an incident in the middle of the night. I'm just reading a book about Hungary, how it happened. You see, the Hungarian Jewish community in Budapest was one of the oldest communities in Europe. The Hungarian Jews were brought by the Romans after the destruction of the Second Temple. Jews were artisans and so on. In the Jewish Museum in Budapest, there's documents that Jews were living there 150 AD. That was the eastern province of the Roman Empire. It was called Pannonia. So Jews were there that early. The Magyars, the Finn-Ugors, the two tribes, came from Mongolia in the 9th century. The Finns went north, the Hungarians came between the Danube and the Tisa. So the Hungarian Jews have been living there for 2,000 years. And the Budapest community was a very influential community. There were 700,000 Jews in Hungary in 1944. There were over 1 million Jews when it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So this book is about Budapest and what did they know. And I'm going to be on a panel. It will be discussed on May the 4th on a Zoom. And I'm just reading the book, the details. It is a very controversial thing of what Jews knew and they didn't warn their brother Jews. And it's very important to know this. We must never be fooled into false, thoughts. So we finished the Seder. In the middle of the night, there's a knock on the gate. Farkash is barking his head off. My father looks out the window, and there is a man, and I recognize his voice. He was the forester. You see, my grandfather had to deal with a forester, because my grandfather used to buy sections of forest, and they could only cut trees that were marked. So this was a very unusual event. Everybody was up immediately. My father had to get up and open the gate. So he came in with a horse and buggy, and he was taken into my grandfather's quarters. And he said to my father, he says, Zoltan, I just came from the pub. There are a bunch of gendarmes gathering there tomorrow morning they're going to pick up all the Jews in town. I want you to take whatever you need, but fast. I want you to get on the wagon. I'm going to take you away right away. I'll hide you in the forest. My grandfather said, no way. So that was the last word of my grandfather was law. I think a lot about that. But you know, whatever grandfather said, that was it. So we went back to bed. I don't think anybody slept a wink after that. About 6:30 in the morning or so, Farkash was barking his head off because he knew who was approaching our property. And from his voice, the way he was barking, we could tell whether it was a friend or a foe. And we could hear a crack. They kicked in the gate for the pedestrian traffic into our property. And seconds later, our door to our bedrooms, and 2 gendarmes are in your bedroom yelling and screaming that you have 2 minutes to pack a bundle. And we are taking you away. If you have any money or jewelry, hand it over, because where you are going, you're going to have no need of this. Think about that. They don't need a warrant. You know. So in this big commotion, my mother said to us kids to put on layers of clothing. Can you imagine my mother? She had the baby in her arm, and she was thinking, how is she going to take care of this family? We didn't know where we were going. My father said, put your boots on. We always had custom-made boots for the winter. There was a Jewish shoemaker, Mr. Gutman. He always made our custom boots for the winter, and Chabad shoes. They were always high lace, so my mother made sure that our ankles would be strong. And my father went in the quarters of my grandparents. My grandfather was 77. He was a strong man. My grandmother was a little feeble lady, Malvina. And my uncle and aunts, they had no children. And in this big commotion, a neighbor comes running in. Her name was Iliklinka. She was a Christian lady. Her husband was some kind of an official in town. You know, when Anna was gone in 1941, I think, when she was taken away, you know who kept us warm? Our neighbor across the street, Iliklinka. Otherwise, we would have been freezing every Shabbat, Friday night, and all day Saturday. She stoked up 3 stoves and 3 fireplaces, and she kept us warm during the winter. The gendarmes were yelling at her, get out of here, this is not your business. And she stood her ground. She said to my mother, Ethel, where are you taking this baby? Why don't you leave the baby with me? And I keep thinking of this, my gosh, in 1944. We think we're going somewhere on a tiul, you know, I don't know, ridiculous, you know. And we were hauled into the school. We were gathered the next day, the 8th of April. So the second night of the Seder, we spent in the school in a room with about 150 Jews per room. Can you imagine? There was no more Seder. It was bitter without herbs, you know, without grain. And we were guarded, we were sealed off by Hungarian gendarmes. So when I came back a year later, what do you think happened in my town where we lived for generations? Jews made the town work. Jews bankrolled everybody, farmers, you know, they bought lumber at the end of the harvest. They brought in livestock for the lumber. Everything was working fine. So Iliklinka told me, while we were still in town, sealed off in the school, every single Jewish home was ransacked to the bare walls. Everything was taken out, the livestock. The synagogue was desecrated, and the Talmud Torah, the prayer books and Talmudic books were burned in a fire. The Torah scrolls were taken out of the ark and cut into pieces and worse. Next morning, 300 Jews were assembled in the schoolyard. And this was an exodus in reverse. You know, we were reading the Haggadah. What a wonderful thing is to go from slavery to freedom. And we are now on a treadmill we can't get off. Rabbi Tenenbaum was an older gentleman. I'll never forget that walk from the school to the railway station. It was so demeaning. People were yelling at us, spitting at us. They were looking out to the windows of the Jewish families. You know, windows are at the height so that you can, in the summer, people are looking out the window. Streets aren't that wide. The mothers were not allowed to have their carriages or strollers. So my mother was carrying a baby in her one arm, some clothing for the baby in the other arm, and herself, and some utensils in a sheet on her back. Can you imagine, mothers? And we were delivered in Kasha, this big city. There were 30,000 Jews put into a brickyard. Life there was terrible. There was a huge communal latrine that you could smell it for miles. There was only 2 taps of water. Mothers couldn't feed their babies because there was no food. Mothers had no milk. The babies were simply wilting away. Every day, we spent almost 3 weeks in this brickyard as they were organizing all the transports. So in Hungary, it was the deportation of the Jews first from all the provinces. Budapest was sort of the last. So the SS officer arrived for about 6 days. You see, he brainwashed us. And he told us a story that you're going to be resettled in the East. You will be working on farms, families will be together, everything will be fine. And I was thinking of the postcard that we received in 1942 from our Slovakian family. They were taken in Lublin. It was a terrible place there, a camp called Majdanek. And I knew the story. I found out a year or 2 after liberation, that before these Jews were gassed in Majdanek, they were forced to write these postcards to their families in Hungary. This is how they were preparing for Hungarian Jews 2 years down the road. Finally, the transports are leaving. We were simply marched in. We were happy to leave this terrible place. Red dust all over. Into the cattle cars, and suddenly the military gendarmes arrived, and suddenly the doors were locked and bolted down, and I knew that we were really in a box. Can you imagine to be in a cattle car? The cattle car was made for 40 soldiers, and I think 60 soldiers and 40 horses. And they were packed in about 100 Jews like sardines in a can. You couldn't breathe. I couldn't see my mother with a baby. She was standing somewhere, squeezed to the wall of this cattle car for 4 days and nights holding a baby and other mothers. Initially, they gave us a pail of water and a pail for a toilet. It was a terrible trip. And then there was a little opening, and then the night comes and it's pitch dark, and all you hear is groans and moans, nightmares, screaming, old people crying. There were a couple of people, old people that passed away. They couldn't dispose of the bodies. And you are in a mass with a bunch of people rolling, and you can hear the click of the wheels of the cattle car on the joints of the rail tracks. Click, click. When I get on a train, when I go from Toronto to Ottawa, you know, first class near Lake Ontario, I can never forget, the train ride to Auschwitz. Suddenly you hear the whistle of the locomotive and you wake up and you think that you just had a nightmare, only to realize that wow, I'm in a nightmare. This is terrible. So finally the train came to a stop. We're being shunted back and forth. I knew that we had finally arrived, and I could hear German being spoken, and the door suddenly opened. Imagine you're in pitch dark and the door is suddenly opened, and this powerful light is flooding the inside of his cattle car. Imagine, look at the inside of his cattle car. All your bundles are piled up. People are trying to hold on or sitting or sleeping on their bundles. This is the only thing you've got. There's a slop, feces, and urine on the floor, stinking. And you're waking up like larvae in a underground, All of a sudden, light was shining on them. Raus, schnell, out fast, and we're out on a platform. So I'm just going there. So here, this is continental Europe. In 1942, the Nazis, they built this fortress Europe from Norway all the way down. France, they call that Festung Europa, Fortress Europe. But think of how many thousands of locomotives were pulling tens of thousands of cattle cars with Jews from Brussels, not Denmark. Denmark shipped all their Jews in fishing dories. They took them over to Sweden, where they stayed for 3 years. Brussels, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Berlin, Bratislava, Budapest, Bucharest, Rome, Paris, Zagreb, Saloniki. Imagine cattle cars from all points of continental Europe heading here to occupied Poland, to Birkenau, Majdanek, Treblinka, Belzec, Chełmno. Do you know that all these tens of thousands of transports, there was not a single sabotage of railroad tracks? Where were these Europeans doing? They simply said, this is not our business. Who cares? Not a single sabotage. Is this a cultured world out there? Who could devise things like this? So these are the pictures that this lady, Iliklinka, saved. 4 pictures. My mother made all these outfits. These mothers were absolutely amazing women. I never forget Friday, late Friday before, we went to shul, my mother finally, that was after we didn't have Anna, the work that she did all week. I remember she always had a lemon and she used to put it on her hands, and I can imagine what her hands felt like. And Iliklinka gave me these 4 pictures. It was the biggest treasure that I brought with me to Canada. I have no picture of my little sister because this was taken in 1938. I was 9 years old. So he was 5. He wasn't quite 2 yet, Moishi. And this picture was taken by the order of the Hungarian police in 1940. It says Makrans 1940. My father was a businessman, my beautiful mother, and the 3 of us boys. And arrived in Auschwitz too. Here's a cattle car that's standing there. So Hungarian Jews, do you think Hungarians could have protected us in 1944? Of course, they could have. Was there a will to do it? No. So this cattle car stands there. And this is the ramp. This is the entrance to Birkenau, Auschwitz, to the killing machine. This is a huge guardhouse. They were manned by SS, manned with machine guns, searchlights. And there's two, this is a huge Birkenau, Auschwitz one. This is the killing camp and a partial labor camp. This was the main track leading all the way to the end between gas chamber and crematoria 2 and 3. For Hungarian Jews, they put in 2 extra tracks, 2 and 3. Hungarian Jews who arrived here, they didn't have a chance because when we arrived, there was no more work because the Reich was falling apart. Jews were being worked to death here in huge factories, ammunition. In Auschwitz III, they were building a huge complex for IG Farben. So there was a selection on this ramp. And this is what the selection looked like. You see, nobody has their bundles. You see, it's the deception. They said you don't need your bundles. You'll have it delivered. Those that are going there are going for disinfection and showers. And these are going for slave labor. A flick of the hand of this officer, left meant gas chamber, right meant slave labor. My father, uncle, and I, we were selected for slave labor. And we were processed. They took away our clothing, our hair was shaved. They put through a shower and put into a wooden barrack with triple-tier bunks. After 4 days standing on my feet, I think I had about 3 or 3.5 hours of wonderful rest, sleep on wooden planks. It was like the best mattress I ever slept on. You see how fast you get used to from a wonderful life and something, such a terrible thing happens to you. If you can't adjust, you know, you can't make it. And women were processed in the women's camp. Their hair was shaved, those that were selected for slave labor. So you see this ramp, and these are the SS, our welcoming committee. I was a witness of 2 SS sergeants. This is Oskar Gröning. He was the bookkeeper of Auschwitz. I went to his trial in 2015, I think, in Lüneburg, Germany. He was 95 years old. Look, a clean-cut guy, 22 years old. He was asked by our lawyer, whose name is Thomas Walter. He was a German judge for 30 years, and he did this work pro bono. And they were witnesses from Canada, US, Israel, Hungary. So he was asked, why did you join the SS? That's the SS ruins, because of their prestigious uniforms. So you know what Oskar Gröning was doing? You know, there was a document called The Final Solution of the Jewish Problem in Continental Europe. It was run by Reinhard Heydrich, the skiller, in Wannsee, a suburb of Berlin, where they figured out exactly, there were 10 heads of ministries, and these were all professional people, doctors, lawyers, the heads of ministries, transport and labor and iron, whatever. This was done in 1 day. They took a break for lunch. There was a roast pig and goose and brandy and you name it, cigars. Eichmann was there. They all signed on. They laid it out exactly how they're going to proceed. They're going to deliver the Jews to these camps. They'll take away their clothes. They'll go through all their remains. People would hide bacon, gold coins in a little piece of bread. And they would have to cut these breads into pieces in some barracks that were called Canada. People would hide currency in the shoulder pads. They were determined to find everything. They laid it all out. And the gold teeth would be knocked out of their bodies after they were gassed, and the gold fillings. And they said nothing will be wasted. They heard of the women would be bailed by the ton, shipped to the Reich. They made material, 50-inch rolls of material. Even the ashes would be sold as fertilizer. So Oscar Groening, he said, I was there. I saw it, I heard it, I smelt it, but I wasn't part of the killing machine. Well, he was simply followed orders. So what else did you do with the gold and the currency? He says, well, I took it in a metal suitcase that I had 2 or 3 times a week, and I took it to Berlin. And where did you deliver it to? To the Reichsbank in Berlin. And did you ever get a receipt? No, there was no receipts. They were stealing of Jews from the entire continent of Europe, gold by the ton. They needed the gold of Jews because they needed to buy goods. The gold wound up in Switzerland. It was a business. And here is his comrade. He's not only in the SS, he's in a unit called the Totenkopf Division of the SS, the Death Head Unit Division of the SS. Not a clean-cut guy. So Oscar Groening, he said, we had to patrol him. Imagine from Hungary, 50 cars are arriving on the platform. And he said that sometimes there were 3 transports in from Hungary, and we could only work on one at a time because they didn't want one transport to see what was happening to another transport because people would put 2 and 2 together. He said we had to work very fast, systematically. Jews were not allowed to take their bundles. They brought in inmates from the camps, Jews, who were unloading the bundles from the cattle cars, put it down on the platform. So there were 50 piles of goods from each cattle car, imagine. And he is patrolling the platform with another comrade, another assessment. And while they're packing these goods in the back, he says, we had to watch these people. They were crooks. They were stealing from the bundles. Can you imagine? I'm sitting there. I'm absolutely, I thought if I want to stand up and choke this dog. You see, he was raised as a good man. You know, stealing is a terrible thing. But killing Jews by the million, that's okay. These were starving people. They were stealing a piece of bread or something. And then he says, as we keep patrolling, we could hear a cry of a baby. He's saying this in court. So my comrade, we go there and he opens up. There was a winter coat covering the basket. And there was a baby crying in the basket. And he said, my comrade grabbed the baby by the ankles and smashed the head against the truck. And he said, the crying stopped. Just like that. He was very talkative. The other guy, he didn't say a single word. Not only that, this guy, while he sat in court, never uttered a single word. He sat there with his head down. Do you know, when we were stopped in the camp by an SS guard, you had to stand stock still in a military fashion and snap off your cap and report. A9892 humbly reports, and you had to look on the ground because how dare a Jew look into the eyes of this Superman? So this German judge, they were all both given 4 years. She said to him, you know, these people who are witnesses here were not allowed to look into your eyes, and you are now 95 years old. You don't want to see these Jews here. So they both applied for medical reasons. They never spent a day in jail. They both died last year, I think, or a year and a half ago. So what Auschwitz was, terrible things were going on here. Dr. Mengele and his doctors who swore the Hippocratic Oath. Dr. Mengele was doing research on twins He wanted to know how each German woman could have multiple births. I've seen women were given high doses of X-rays so they couldn't bear children. I saw teenagers who were castrated. I saw so on July the 9th, we are sleeping the sleep of the dead in July of 44. And the loudspeakers are turned on. These are powerful loudspeakers in Auschwitz I. Achtung, Achtung. All inmates from all these barracks run naked to barrack such and such for selection. And by that time, we knew selection was death. And in the morning, you had to be counted before you went to work. Can you imagine 25,000 people marching out through the gate to go to the different jobs? And at the gate, as you leave the camp, you're picked up by a unit of SS guards with their attack dogs. Nothing moves until the count is right. So before, it's called appel. It was appel in the morning, appel in the evening. These appels were a killer. On a good day, it took an hour and a half to 2. On a bad day, when the count wasn't right, they had to go and look for the bodies, bring them down and hold them up. They stand there for 3 to 4 hours. So I ran to my father's barrack after the selection in the evening, and they were not there. I knew that the worst happened. And then I saw them, and I went to see again at the quarantine. There were a few barracks were quarantined. And I was yelling out their names, and I happened to see them. And I had only seconds to say goodbye to my father and uncle through the wire. And the guard was yelling from the guard tower, if I don't move, shoot with a machine gun. My father gave me a blessing. I used to Yevarechacha, every Friday night when we came home from the synagogue. And my father said, if I manage to survive, you have to tell the world what happened here. So this is what happened to them. The killers wrote everything down. In German there's a saying that Ordnung muss sein, order must be. Whoever had a tattoo numbered, they kept perfect records. And this was the list where my father and uncle were selected out for medical experiments. And this list is sitting today in the museum archives in Auschwitz. See, the killers were their own bookkeepers and archivists. And you see A9891. A was the designated letter for Hungarian transports. And this happened on July the 9th, 1944, never to be seen again. So my father is gone. 2 weeks later, I had a terrible hit on my head by a guard with his gun. I lost a lot of blood. I was about 6 kilometers out from the camp. We're doing draining swamps or whatever. And I went into shock, and I knew that my life was finished, because once you lost your legs, they couldn't get you on your feet, you were finished. So from morning till 6 o'clock in the evening, I was in this ditch, and all these things were going through my head. I was looking at all the others doing unimaginable heavy work, and I said how happy I would be to do that work rather than be stuck in this ditch. I can't move my feet. And I was, I knew that this evening I'm going to go to the gas chamber. And I was put on a 2-wheeler that carried all our tools, brought back to camp, to Auschwitz I. I was taken to Barrack 21, which was the surgery department, and the ward was upstairs. And I guess they operated on me. I woke up the next morning. I was in a ward upstairs. My head was bound with paper bandages because they had no other stuff. It was paper. And I was told there were 2 Jewish doctors in the ward. One was a Dr. Gordon, a Polish Jewish doctor from Warsaw, and a Dr. Samuel Steinberg from Paris. And they told me that I was operated on by two Polish political prisoners who were, the chief surgeon was a Dr. Tadeusz Orzeszko. They were political prisoners. And so 2 days later, if you couldn't walk away, you were put on a stretcher and taken to the gas. And I was put on a stretcher, brought down the steps, passed by the prep room to the surgery department, and there was Dr. Orzeszko. I think there was some kind of a collaboration between Dr. Unger and this Dr. Orzeszko. And he pulled me off the stretcher, brought me into the prep room, and he gave me a lab coat and he said, "You'll be the cleaner." It was July the 15th or the 20th, and I worked in the operation room, in the operating surgery department for 6 months. He saved my life. You know, there were doctors who swore the Hippocratic Oath and they were killing people by the thousands here. So you see women, these are Hungarian women. As a slave laborer and a man, we had a cap, a jacket, pair of pants, and my boots. Once your boots were gone, you received a pair of wooden clogs. Can you imagine from a normal world, even if you are hungry, you have your clothing, you have some food, or you can. Here, you have no underwear, you have no socks, you have no toilet paper. How do you deal with all these things? You know, women had it a million times worse than men. You know, think about women. Hungarian women, they were recently married. They could have been 2 or 3 months pregnant, and they didn't show. And once they started to show, they were picked out and put into the gas chamber. There was a Dr. Gisela Pearl in Birkenau. She was called the Angel. She had to abort the fetuses of these young mothers with her bare hands to save the life of the mother. She arrived and she survived, arrived in the States, and then she moved to Israel and she delivered thousands of children in Israel. But women were the two heroines in the camp. You see, in a men's camp, once my father and uncle were gone, nobody would take me under their wing. And the women, these women formed support groups. They were true heroines. There were 4 young women in the early 20s, 2 Polish girls and 2 Slovak girls. On January the 6th, 1945, they were working in the Union Ammunition Works. They managed to smuggle out explosives, and they were collected and given to the Sonderkommando in crematoria, I think 3, I'm not sure, but it's 4 maybe. And they managed to blow up the crematoria. And the Gestapo, they used this powder, you know, to form some explosives, Molotov cocktails. So the Gestapo was checking the makeup of the DNA of the explosive, and because they could tell right away where it was manufactured. So it was manufactured in Birkenau. So they grabbed these 4 girls, and they were beaten blue and black. They may not have been the ones, you know, they simply picked 4 girls. And they didn't say anything. And on January the 6th, 6 days before I was taken on a death march, these 4 Jewish girls were hanged in Auschwitz I. They were brought there, they were black and blue, their hands were tied, they were put on the gallows in Auschwitz I. There were 4 nooses hanging and they put it around their necks. And we had to watch it. We were pushed out to watch this, thousands of us, the men. And I will never forget that moment. It was a terrible moment to see 4 young women. And you know, they said 2 Hebrew words, Chazak ve'amatz, which means be strong and of good courage. They were telling us to be strong. There was such a groan going out of the chest. And you know, the Nazis realized that this is a danger. And they right away, they went into action and they took their dogs and were moved away from there. This was 6 days before I left Auschwitz. And this was the end. The gas chambers were underground. They were brought up with the lifts. They put on this drop of water. And these are the Sonderkommando Jews that were selected for this terrible work. And they were rotated every 60 days. They were gassed. They wanted to make sure that never will anything get out of here. So these pictures were made by a Greek Jew who managed to escape at the end. His name was David Olaire. And some of his sketches were also saved in the grounds of the crematorium. So this is Dr. Rajeshko. I tracked down the family. Dr. Rajeshko survived. And whenever I go in the March of the Living, I meet his family. They're very prominent people. This is Dr. Rajeshko's son. He was a retired diplomat, and his daughter, and his grandchildren. Yulia, she's the youngest. I met them first in 2010. These are all the grandchildren. They never knew their grandfather because he died before they were born. So she wanted to know what kind of man was his father. He was an amazing man. Can you imagine surgeons putting people together who are almost dead, broken bones, but they needed to do the right thing because they swore this oath. I found out after that Dr. Rajeshko was the head of the underground operation in Auschwitz I. You see, the Polish intelligentsia were the first people in Auschwitz I. So you read in my book how this whole thing worked, and he was an amazing man. I had no idea. And I had, no business to know it. So this was the operating room, very simple. We had no blood plasma, we had no intravenous, very simple. But I was working here from 7 o'clock till 12 at night. I had to take the bloody sheets every day, piles of it next door to the laundry, pick them up the next morning, fold them and sterilize them in this autoclave. Instruments had to be cleaned and brushed, dried and put away in credenzas, but I had to go, And this was the death march, January the 12th, 1945. Started in Auschwitz, we walked for 4 days and nights, and then we put into open flat cars, Dresden, Pilsen, occupied Czechoslovakia, Mauthausen. 13 days without a crumb of food. How can you do this? Oh, sorry. You can do everything if you set your mind to it. I had to focus every second of the day. If you lost your way for a split second, it could be your end. You had to be tough. You had to have eyes in front of you, in the back of you. You had to be resilient and bite the bullet and keep going. It is terrible. Your body is aching. Your stomach linings are screaming for food. And you can put in a day's work that a man would need 4,000 calories to do that. And we were doing it on 300 calories a day. But moving from one camp to another was a terrible thing. Thousands were lost. They simply their strength gave out. So May the 6th, we arrived in Ebensee, not far from Salzburg in the Alpine Mountains. And down below is a beautiful lake called Ebensee. So we arrived at the beginning of April, and the rack was finished. There was no work. About 3 weeks before liberation, they simply locked the camp and threw away the keys. 300 calories were not given to us. I mean, there was water that we received, a cup in the morning, a cup for lunch, nothing. And we were infested with lice. They carried typhus from body to body. I was in a lower bunk. I had high fever. And somebody, a ghost, comes in in his wooden clogs. Excuse me. And he's mumbling that the guards are no longer in the tower. So I'm listening to this. We were 5 people in a layer. 2 on each side of me were dead. I hardly had the strength to get myself out from all these cadavers, crawl out, and I could hear heavy equipment coming up. Seconds later, I see the gate came crashing in, and the big tank was coming through. It had a white star on it, and there were black soldiers sitting on the turret. That was Liberation Day. And these were some of the ones that were able to stand. You see, there's not a drop of protein on anyone. This is skin and bone. That's it. And this was a style of clothing we had left. And Johnny Stevens was the squadron commander of 12 tanks. 760 was Black Panther Tank Battalion. They were attached to General Patton's Third Army. And I will never forget the eyes of these soldiers. They came through the Battle of the Bulge. A tough battle, but you know, they were in total shock. They had no idea. Johnny Stevens with his tanks were below, and up on this hill, they could see buildings with barbed wire fence and guard towers. They didn't know what it was. So he said, told a couple of tanks, get up there, find out what it is. And they right away, they came through the gate. They radioed down, they said, you better come down here fast. They were in total shock. This was May the 6th. It was very warm. There were thousands and thousands of decomposing bodies. There were flies by the billions flying from these mounds of bodies. And they were gone because the war went on for 2 more days. And another unit came, and they had no idea how to deal with these numbers of people who were on the way out. They had to cut these filthy rags off from us. Our skin was like the skin of a snake. The dirt was caked in so badly. We're being DDT'd. We were in a fog of DDT to kill the lice. And you know, the year that I spent, my body worked 110%. You know, it used up every bit of strength that I had. My body simply collapsed. When I saw that tank, I said, that's it, I'm free. The SS are gone, they're not going to kill me. And then the real battles began. You see, you're liberated, but you're not free. I wound up in a hospital. I was not getting well. And in July, they decided to close the camp. So the American Army truck took us to Czechoslovakia. It's a place called České Budějovice, on the border with Austria. And I had to make my way back home. I'm going home. I know where else to go. My body was getting bigger and bigger. I was retaining water. The American Army found a huge warehouse full of Hitler Youth shirts and breeches, corduroy breeches. So we all got a Hitler Youth shirt and corduroy breeches and a pair of boots. And I couldn't fit in because water was the water was up to here. I couldn't breathe. Took me weeks to get home. I could see a farmer gave me a ride for the last 5 kilometers. And I'm heading for home. I could see my home from a distance. And the building is there. It has bullet holes on one wall, like big holes, like a stray of bullets from a machine gun or something. And but the roof was still there. It was at that place when I was a half kilometer away. I was hoping that Farkas would be there to greet me because he had such an acute sense of smell. He would know when I'm coming home from school. He would give my mother a signal the way he was barking that we are coming back from school, or in the summer from shul at 10 o'clock or 10:30. He wasn't there. A neighbor was sitting in my mother's kitchen, wouldn't give me a glass of water. So this was homecoming, and how do you pick up the pieces? So I went to see this lady, Ili Klinka, and she just screamed out when she saw me. She realized immediately that I need to be taken to a hospital. The first thing she did, she took away these filthy clothes. I mean, I was filthy. Imagine coming back to Košice, a beautiful city where I was an apprentice. It's a beautiful city, and this is now 1945, July. I'm so filthy in a Hitler shirt. It has a beautiful station, and there's a river Hornad, and you have to cross this bridge. And there's a most beautiful park. I'm out of breath, and I just wanted to sit down under these beautiful trees. It was such a peaceful moment. And I said, where am I going now? How can I go out on the street among people looking like a rag? And you walk on the street and people give you a wide berth, You know what it means like, to be a total outcast. And so I used to lodge with some cousins when I was doing my apprenticeship. They were not there. Somebody else lived in an apartment. They had a kosher restaurant. It was boarded. It was locked. How am I going to get home? I went to the marketplace. Kasha is about 50 kilometers from my town. So Ili Klinka got me to a hospital. He managed to get a farmer with his horse and buggy. I had to sit in this car. They put a bale of hay behind my back because I couldn't lay down. It was St. Elizabeth Hospital. Nuns were with the nurses. They took away these filthy rags. They washed me down. And I said, I don't ever want to leave this place. It was beautiful, clean sheets and the mattress. I mean, this was a luxury. 1 second in Auschwitz was like 1,000 years. So eventually I wound up. So this is my home. This is Ili Klinka and her little daughter. She passed away some 25 years ago. The house had bullet holes right through here. She got money from the government to fix up my home. I didn't go back there. I think she rented it. I said, well, keep the money. She sent me some money. I had no other income. I wound up in a yeshiva in a place called Marienbad, which is a world famous spa outside Prague. It gave me a roof over my head. It was supported by the American Joint. They sent us food, and they brought a Rabbi Stern from Budapest and his wife. And they had a couple there who were our cooks. And there was 35 of us to 40 fluctuated. And we had a roof over our head, and I was learning to be a dental technician. So I went back to Moldova in 1992 after the Velvet Revolution, when the Berlin Wall came down. And so my friend Gabi Lichtman and I, you see the fence is gone. We had a big gate here. This is a big L-shaped house, and the orchards are in the back. I have Googled the whole property. And there's a big, so we went back in 1992. We came through the gate here. There was a metal gate, and there were people working there. There was an in-ground scale, trucks and weighing trucks with metal. And there was a lady who was the manager. And I told her, I was born in this house. So she said, oh, do you want to come in and see the house? I said, no. See, most of the doors from our property are on the other side. It's a covered veranda all around. So more of the windows from that part and all the doors are opening on the other side. And I said, I just want to walk in the orchard, and all the trees were a mess. And 3 men drove in a big car, and And she's telling them, I could understand Slovak. She was telling these three guys that, you see, this man was born in this house. So the three men look at you as you're marching back. I'm marching back and I keep thinking, what am I doing here? What am I doing here? So he turns back to this lady, the manager. He says to her, "Je to Žid?" You know, Žid is like saying the N-word. Is he a kike? In Slovak, it's Žid. So I walked up to him. I said, "Yes, I'm Žid. I'm a Jew." And he's yelling at me, "Do you want to buy the house?" Can you imagine? I said, "No, this is my house." We left, you know, there was no point. So I was back there 2 years ago. We were doing a documentary for the Shoah Foundation. We were we're doing it for a week, a day in Auschwitz 1, a day in Auschwitz 2. Then we came to Košice and to my town. This is what my house looks like today. It's a scrapyard. And all the other homes were removed and they're all were metal things. The house has grown about 4 times before. So it looks terrible. And so when I was back there 2 years ago, they painted off the name of the company. And I heard that they are selling it. So somebody who was our guide from Prague, he said, "Let me call the registry." You know, they wiped out all the Jewish ownerships from all the Jewish homes, most of them, and all the Jewish homes in town in the registry. They said, "Oh, Fabian Eisen, no, there's no Eisen on the registry." But we did find the lot sizes in another town. So we have the proof that, you know, they were totally lying. Slovakia had to deal with the survivors before they were allowed to enter Europe. So 77 years ago, about 6 weeks ago, I had a call from the Wiesenthal Center. She said, we have an email for you from Moldova. Moldova nad Borgo. I said, yeah. And I keep thinking, who's sending me an email? And she said, this teacher, her name is Katerina Kishova. She's saying, do you happen to know Mr. Tibor Eisen was born here in Moldova? We would like him to speak to our students on Zoom. Just about flipped. And, you know, it was overwhelming. And I sent her an email. I said, I'd be happy to do it. And I said, let's do a Zoom to get to know each other. And she teaches English. She speaks perfect English. And I can't show you a picture of the shul. You see, all around the shul, it's built up. But this shul is standing there like a poor derelict, you know, black. They're a beautiful shul. And it's black and filthy. It had a huge wrought iron fence and gates. Somebody stole it for scrap metal. I said to her, you know, I was there 2 years ago in 2019. I said, you know, it breaks my heart. I cannot go back to this place. She said, you know, the mayor made an announcement about a month ago that we're going to have to do something about, they're going to fix up the shul. So what we did is eventually we set up the Zoom. There were about 300 students and TV was there. I spoke to them for 4 hours. I told them about, as far as I could remember, every single Jewish family who lived there. And I said, who do you think is responsible to repair this synagogue? He said, we are. I said, well, when it's repaired, I said, think of what you're going to put on this flag that you're going to put on about these Jewish citizens who live here and who are such contributors to it. So I think it opened a gate. And, you know, I spoke to them on Pesach, Holocaust, 77 years later. I told him, isn't this ironic that you called me? Because we are taken away on Pesach, and I'm talking to you 77. I said, I'm glad that you didn't wait too long because, the scene could have been different. Anyway, so this was the yeshiva in Marienbad. And Czechoslovakia was again a democracy. Most of these people are not living anymore. And we became a communist country overnight. This is how fast it can happen. We went to bed, and it was August of 48. Next morning, we turned on the radio, and we are in a communist country. They arrested the president, President Benesh. They arrested the heads of the Democratic parties. They arrested the chiefs of staff. They took over Radio Prague, and bingo, we were in a communist country. And most of us were Slovak Jews, but we had young boys from Romania, from Hungary, who were foreigners in Czechoslovakia. And we, who were 19 years old, we had to report to go to the army, 19 years old. So we grabbed our backpacks, and we knew that we have to get the heck out of here. 3 of us were caught at the border and wound up in the biggest jail in Prague, right here, Pankraz. I spent about 4 months here. I was given 25 years. It was a crime against the government. That was serious business. A killer is not so bad, but a political prisoner that's serious. So, of course, I speak in Canada, an amazing country. And these are our 2 little great-grandchildren. Well, they're Yehudet has the name of my baby sister, whose name was Judith. This is Elisheva, and this is Michael there. She is now 13, 11, and he is 9. They live in Yerushalayim. And, writing a book, I didn't know. It took me many years to write it. I could talk forever, but I didn't want to write. But I finally realized that I have to write. So a month after my book was launched, I had a call from New York. And he says, my name is Josh Eisen. I read your book. He says, my grandfather and your grandfather were brothers. So we are cousins. Josh, he said, I need to know. He came to Toronto with a family tree. I had no idea of a family tree. I didn't know that my grandfather had 6 siblings that emigrated to the States in 1909 or thereabouts. So you can see on this stone, this is very unique because most of the stones that you find in Europe are broken to pieces. This is in a little town. He went to my town. I thought that he can find my aunt's stone, but he said he went there, and he called me from there. He said, there's nothing here, no stones. I said, we'll go to the next town. We had a family there. So 2 hours later, he calls me, and he's standing beside the stone. Tzvi Yaakov, this is my great-grandfather. And my father's brother, my uncle, his name was Tzvi Yaakov. And there were about 12 stones saved in the Jewish cemetery in this town. It's called Chechayovce. And these 12 stones were moved to the Christian cemetery in a corner. That is a little bit, it's respectful at least that they put it in a corner, but they put a soccer field up on the Jewish cemetery. So that's the way things are going, you see. But I'm very thankful that they at least put this. So I found out a year later, we had a gathering in Manhattan, 98 people, 4 brothers of my grandfather and 2 sisters. Nobody told me. I had no idea that we had a family in New York. 3 and 4 generations came to this gathering. So anti-Semitism, there's plenty of it here. You see, I had my poster beside synagogues. This was 2 years ago. They called me, the police, on Saturday. It says, UJA, we make Holocaust education happen. Somebody crawled out on a Friday night and put this marker on my forehead, Achtung, which means attention, Max. This is in Toronto. So you see, it arrived here. And it's like words are powerful. Once a word is put out there, you can never take it back. So that is my story in a nutshell. You can get a full story if you read my book. I have a large website. It's called bychancealone.com. Look into that. You'll see a lot of speeches who I speak to and where I travel. Of course, there's no traveling. I'm busy Zooming, and I have some big Zooms that we spoke to teachers and students in Ontario, to the largest school board. We had 20,000 people on the Zoom. So Likey, I'll leave it there. And if you have any questions, send it to me and or ask me. And
Thank you, Max. Thank you for sharing your story. I can imagine how challenging it is to relive it every single time you share it. So thank you for taking the time to do that. Thank you to everyone who's stayed on to listen to Max and his story and his message. Before I forget, I want to thank the History Department, the Religious Studies Department, and the Office of Religious and Spiritual Life for helping to co-sponsor and make this very important event possible. I also do want to show Max's book. It's actually available for purchase on Amazon. You can go on Amazon and read it, order it and read it. It's an incredible book. Over Shabbat, over the weekend, I took the time to read it, and lots of new things that I learned, and just very powerful, very inspiring, a lot to process. And you can gain so much about resilience from reading Max's story. So thank you very, very much. And thank you to Professor Burke. It is late, and if anybody would like to ask some questions, on the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A. You can submit any questions for Max right there. We can take a few minutes to do that. Max went into a lot of detail in your story, and I appreciate it. And there's even more detail in the book, just different things, your experience in Auschwitz, how you survived and on your own as a young teenager, going through the death march, and even once you were liberated, just to get to Canada, how you had to go through so much to finally really, be free. It's been just, just reading it, just such a journey to get there. So thank you so much. Yeah, so the questions are about how you got out of prison, how you were able to escape communist Czechoslovakia.
Well, communists are very bankrupt bunch, and the three of us were paid off by a Jewish organization. I think they paid $2,000 US for each of us. And they said, get lost. And here we were outside, and so we had to run the border again. I got involved with a Hungarian Jewish transport from Bratislava, and we managed to get into Austria to the American zone. And it wasn't easy. I had to go from Vienna to the American zone, And there was the only Canadian embassy was in Salzburg, and they gave us a very difficult time. You know, post-war Canada in 1949, 4 years after the war, Jews were not allowed to come here. But you know, these bad guys who were volunteer SS units from East Europe, they came here by the thousands. So the perpetrators arrived here before the victims arrived, but finally, October the 5th or so, I went to Salzburg, and they told me that I had a permit, a visa to come to Canada. So it was another journey.
Thank you. Someone's asking a question more about, they're wondering about your thoughts on contemporary comparisons to the Holocaust. Do you think these comparisons are ever acceptable? Do you think these comparisons are made too often, too little?
There is no comparison whatsoever. You see, genocide, look it up, it's a combination of two Greek words, genocide, tribal warfare. This is what happened in Cambodia, and this is what happened in Rwanda. Hitler was going after all the Jews, no matter where you lived. And he was going after every single Jew in every land. And had he not been put away, put out of commission, who knows what would have happened. So there's absolutely no equivalent to this terrible thing. You know, it's, and the thing is that this terrible hatred, where is it coming from? It's just awful. I'm not sure what I told you. Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, heard of him? He was the chief rabbi of England. He passed away, I think about 3 months ago. We lost the giant. He said sometimes in the last few months, he compared anti-Semitism, he said, is a virus that survives by mutating. And they hated us in the Middle Ages because of our religion. They hate us in the 19th and 20th century because of our race. And they hate us now because of our nation state, Israel. So anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism. And it's plenty of it around. And so this is very worrying when you are on a subject of anti-Semitism. Everybody gets on board. I know that words lead to terrible things, you know. And it's like a Pandora's box that was opened and nobody can close it now. And we need to be strong. We need to remember what those 4 girls said. I keep thinking of students who are in grade 12 and they hit university. And are they prepared to stand up and rise up? And these are the future of our people. You know, they meet some real big challenges, you know. Are they prepared for this challenge? So these are the things that are going through my mind. We are like a chain that every single link must be strong. We need our 2nd generation, our 3rd generation, and 4th generation to get involved. We can run, but we can't hide. I always say that Jewish teenagers, boys, girls, they should learn some kind of martial arts. It gives them a goal. It gives them strength. I know some kids that are doing it, they're not Jewish, that were very weak in school and they had problems, and it gives them focus You need to have focus, you need to have strength, and you need to have a goal. So the time has come, and look at our kids, our brothers and sisters, the young teenagers in Israel. They're 18 years old. They go to the army and they have to fight to protect their country. Can our kids do at least 50% of what they're doing? Get strong, both physically and mentally. This is what I'm trying to tell parents. And because I cannot get over what it is. I was a second and third class citizen as a kid, segregated in a school. I don't ever want a Jew to run away from anything. I want him to stand up and rise up and stand his ground. So I think this is my message. And we have plenty of examples. You see what Israeli kids are doing. Many are doing it here, and Hillel organizations. I speak to a lot of them. And you need to stand up and be confident. I think the parents need to get involved more, perhaps. And I know that we are lockdowns and all that sort of thing, but this is a time when we need to get stronger, not weaker. We are locked down, but we have no SS guards. There's no gas chambers. Sure, it's very inconvenient. You can get sick, and God forbid. And I keep thinking of Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Every day I think of Viktor Frankl. I get upset too. I'm locked down. I miss this close contact with people, with students. He was studying who were the people that survived. He was in Auschwitz I. And he wrote in his book that if you had a why, they found a how. They went into a deep depression and they were done away with. And depression seems to be a big problem today. So you need to be determined. You need to get up at 7 in the morning or whatever. Get dressed and go, like you go to work, you go and do your business. And then have time for yourself to play or read or whatever. But we need to get stronger from this experience. So I speak to other survivors, and look, I'm busy. I had 7 big presentations last week. I mean, I had 2 days, double headers, and I miss contact with people, but this is very important. And I'm doing this. I've been doing this for 32 years. And I cannot think of not doing it, It's so this is our lot. That's what we're dealing with. These are the cards we were dealt with, and we need to deal with it. You see?
Thank you. It's amazing. In your one answer, you answered 3 other questions that came up about, what gave you the strength to continue, what drives you to continue telling your story. There are some questions about, were you able to persevere in your Jewish faith and belief in God? If you ever lost your faith, were you able to reclaim it, what your journey was with, faith and belief in God. And that's complicated. And
yeah, it's complicated. Think about it. You survive and you're all alone. And then you get where other Jews are, and you see, from my town, there were 2 brothers that came back, Gabi Lichtman and Andre Lichtman. And Gabi was in my class. And the feelings that you have here, how lucky he is. 2 brothers, and I'm all alone, and you want to feel sorry for yourself. And you can't get there, you have to start thinking straight. It's very difficult. From the 300 people in my town, less than 20 came back. There was only a mother, Mrs. Rosenberg, with 2 teenage daughters. And I thought, what a wonderful thing that was. I met up with them, but she was not the same person. She didn't want to have anything to do with me because she had such pain that her son didn't make it, and I had a pain because I wanted to belong to somebody, to somewhere. you know, and there was nobody. And there was a Mr. Gottlieb, if you read in the hospital, he came to visit, see if there's any people that came back from the camps. And we found out that we are cousins, or third cousins. And he said, when they let you out of the hospital, you have to come and live with us. And I was like thin as a rail. And so there are people that were there for me at the very crucial times. And this is what you have to deal with. It's how to pick up the pieces was very difficult. Coming back to my town, I was away a year, but it seemed like I was a million years away. And you can't touch anything, and you see it; it's all empty, and you have to get over it. And I was able to think my way out of it, or physical. I did physical things. I always, when I had problems, I did physical things to get it out of my. I'm always thinking days ahead. If I have a task to do, or how I'm going to do it. This is what I have to do in the camp. I have to think of the next day, this terrible work that I'm doing. How am I going to lift this cement pylon, around the camps that the electrified wires were stronger? Can you imagine that brute of a thing? 3 of us had to pick it up from a skid, take it down a ditch, and take it up the ditch and put it in a post. That was a killer. You see, if it dropped, it could kill you and break your every bone. And if you dropped it, they would shoot you because it's called sabotage. You have to think it out. How are you going to lift with everybody in unison? How am I going to deal with my heels are open wounds, sticking to the boots, and my hands are bleeding, full of blisters. You don't have a bandage. You can't go to you have to suck it up and deal with it, So that's what you need to do. So nothing is easy, it's, there's, as they say, somebody said that, he was an American diplomat, destiny is not a matter of chance. It is a matter of choice. It is not a thing to be waited for. It is a thing to be achieved. So Viktor Frankl's book is an amazing book. So you need to have a goal. Everybody needs a goal. That would help. Yeah. So how many people are in your town there? Jewish people? The community?
Professor Burke, you probably have that answer. We're at Union College, and there are probably right now somewhere between 200 and 250 Jewish students. It's about 10% of the population.
Oh, okay.
But in the local area, Professor Burke, you probably have a better answer than I do.
20,000 people, 20,000 Jews in Albany, Schenectady, Troy, and Saratoga.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's, in Canada, we're having a difficult time. There's no vaccine. And it was very bad management. We are somewhere in 50th place or something.
My parents are in Canada, so I know that actually, so both of our grandfathers escaped the Holocaust and also made their way to Canada, to Montreal.
From where? Where are they from?
My grandfather from Poland. They're both from Poland.
Okay. Yeah.
So we know about Canada. We do know about. So yeah. I really want to take this. I want to thank you for your time and for sharing your message and your story. It's such a gift for all of us to be able to hear it and to think about it and really take the message, like I shared in the beginning. Memories are not just passive, but it's a call to action for us what do we do about that now? How do we make sure that we have, never again, to always remember? And I loved how you said you started and ended your talk with words matter. Something that I always think about is, like I shared in the beginning, the Rebbe, who is our spiritual inspiration, one of the things that he said was, just like Hitler hunted out every single Jew with hate, we have to search out every single person with love, to really be empathetic and understanding and accepting of people unconditionally, because every human being has value. And also, what Viktor Frankl said about having, the will to meaning, of having a meaning. His book is fantastic and highly recommended, and everyone should read it, as well as your book, By Chance Alone, because there's a lot of messages and thoughts that come in from your book. So thank you again very, very much. Really, really appreciate the time. And
if you
thank
send out
you.
a flyer, you communicate with other branches of Chabad or whatever, your experience or what happened here today.
Yes, absolutely. Happy to
So-
share. Absolutely.
So, my book was launched in New York as well by Hanover Square Press. The opening was on January 22nd. I think it was last January, it was still okay. And at the Jewish Heritage Museum. But after that, everything was locked down. So I haven't been able to do and promote my book in the States, and I'm waiting and waiting, So to do that, hopefully that will happen. But I'm doing the best I can, and now you've got it, and see what you can do with it, and your kids and grandkids, and that would make me very happy,
Absolutely.
Thank you.
L'chaim to meeting in person very soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Rabbi, Professor Stephen Berg, and all of you keep well and stay safe.
You too.
You too. All
Thank
the
you.
best. Thank you.
All the best.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.